Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Artisan Workshop tutorial series. In this episode, we are going to continue the workshop management part of the mod. And this might be a bit longer episode because I want us to go from not having management capabilities at all to having a custom screen for managing our workshops. So first of all, I need to explain what are screens and what are game states. And then once we get our screen running, we can move on to actually implementing the UI that we need for our management. And the UI will be done in Gauntlet UI, just like the other menus in the game. But this will be a bit more complicated than, for example, the combat HUD that we did in the previous episodes. So you will see a bit more of how the Gauntlet UI actually works. So let's get started with how the game actually handles the screens and what are game states. So I'm going to again use my useful UI debug mode. And if you're interested, you can get this mod on the Nexus mods. But I featured this previously in the episode where we built the combat UI. But this time, let's look at the game states and the screens. So I will again have to zoom in a bit because this font in this window is kind of small. But anyway, here we are on the main map, and I want you to look at this game states list. This is basically a stack. So a stack is a container where you can put new things in, but if you want to remove things, you have to remove the latest thing you added. So basically how this will work is that on the bottom, we will have the map state, which is the most fundamental part of the campaign state. And on top of that, you can pile up new states. But if you want to remove one state, you always get back whatever you had before you added that state. And once you peel everything off, you are left back with just the map state. So if we look at, for example, what happens when I go into a clan screen. So let me press L to enter a clan screen. You can see that now in our game states, we have the map state and the clan state or the clan screen state. So we basically pushed one more state onto this stack of game states. And that triggered the game to switch to the clan view or the clan screen. And these are indeed called screens in the game. So every one of these different menus, like for example, if I go into the party screen, you can see that we first popped off the clan state and replaced that with a party state, but still underneath that, we have still the map state. So at any time, we could return onto the map state. Since now the first state we have is the party state, we are on the party screen. And the screen manager right now has the party screen layers. And here, the first one you can see is the party screen movie, which is the most important layer for this party screen UI. But you also have a bunch of other stuff such as pop-up and the chat log, which you don't usually want to get rid of. And if we go back onto the main map by pressing, for example, escape, you can see that we went back to just having the map state as our only state. And you can see that layers are now fairly different. Now our first layer is not a Gauntlet layer, but instead it's a scene layer. And scene layers are something that render these 3D views, such as the campaign map 3D view. So you see that by changing the game state, we switched to a different screen, in this case the map screen, and all our layers were changed to the map layers. So if we want to implement our own menu, what we should do is to push our own game state here on top of the map state, assuming that we come from a map. And then once we have our own state as the active state, we will need to implement our own screen for our state. And once we have our own screen for our state, we can start adding all the Gauntlet UI stuff onto that screen that we have. So let's get started on that. So let's try to find where the game states are kept. And that is, of course, in Game State Manager. And inside the Game State Manager, you have methods for controlling the current game state. So you have push state, which will add new state. You have pop state, which does the reverse. And you also have clean and push if you want to for example, switch to a completely different game mode. Of course, you don't actually ever want to do this. I'm not even sure if this is used anywhere, because to change the game mode, you actually have to do a lot more things. So realistically, you just want to push states or pop states. And to get a new game state, you can use create state. And if we look at how create state is used, for example, open kingdom action, you can see that this will be something like game state manager create state and game state manager push the newly created state onto the game state stack. And something like this will be enough to give us our new game state. So let's just go ahead and do just this. So first of all, we should create an option to the game menu that we created last time. So let's do new add game menu option. So that from the same menu that we added last time, we can go also into the management UI. So let's call this Sound Workshop Management. And again, we will need condition and a consequence. And our consequence is going to be game state manager current to get the current game state manager, create state with our state. And we can call this Artisan Workshop Management state. And we also need to push this into the stack. So we need to get the game state manager again and push state with our newly created state. And this will be our consequence. Of course, Artisan Workshop Management state does not exist, but we can just create this. And I don't like the convention of naming your files based on classes. I think the files should be related to functionality. So let's just rename this to Artisan Workshop Management. And the Artisan Workshop Management state should be something similar to what we saw earlier. So we saw, for example, party state. This inherits from player game state, but I think just game state will be enough for us. So let's get this from game state. And this doesn't need to be internal, it can be public. So if you look at what, for example, party state does, you can see that it is very short class that doesn't really do much of anything interesting. But one thing we want to do here is that we want to pass through our currently selected Artisan Workshop, so that later on it will be easier for us to figure out what workshop we are actually managing, since inside this part we actually know where we are, but later on it would be harder to figure out. So we have our currently selected workshop in this local field selected workshop, and we can also give the Artisan Workshop for the state. So we want our constructor arguments to match whatever we used here in our create state. So we want first argument to be workshop and second argument should be Artisan Workshop state. So workshop and Artisan Workshop state. And we can just keep these, I think. So let's make fields for each of these that will hold these arguments that are passed to us. Like so. And here you can see that the create state is complaining that this type we are trying to use does not have a parameterless constructor. So we actually need to add stupid parameterless constructor here. But we can make sure that this is never called by throwing by throwing, for example, new argument exception. So this is just dummy constructor that we don't actually want to use ever. But I guess this is somehow stupid and doesn't understand what we want to do. So now this should be enough for us to get our state pushed onto the stack of game states. The next thing we need to figure out is how does the game actually switch screens. And this will again be a bit weird in my opinion, maybe interesting. But the way the game actually switches between screens is through these attributes on the actual screen classes. So to create a new screen, you need to create new class that inherits from screen base, and you should also inherit from game state listener interface. And you need this attribute, game state screen, that will tell which state this class is listening for. So let's copy all of this so that we don't make any mistakes when we try to remember how to actually do this. So we should rename our class first of all to, let's say, workshop management screen. We need to inherit from screen base and game state listener. We don't need this changeable screen though. Type we give here should be our management state. And we should have a constructor for this, which takes our state Artisan Workshop state and we should store this state as well. And we should do the same thing they do here, which is to set this thing as the listener. We should set this instance we created for the screen as the listener for the state. And this should also be a game state listener so that we can actually listen for changes in the game state. And what the game state listener will give us is these 4 methods that Visual Studio very kindly wrote here for us. So this is the implementation for this game state listener interface. And finally, this is where we can start writing our Gauntlet UI code. After all this piping, so for example, here in the party screen, you see that when the corresponding state activates, they will create new Gauntlet layer and set some hotkey stuff, and then they will load their Gauntlet movie. And consequently, when this game state deactivates, they will reverse the process and remove their stuff from the Gauntlet layer. So we can do the same thing, and we will need a Gauntlet layer underscore layer. So then when the state activates, we can create new Gauntlet layer. I guess 1 will be again be fine for the local order. Here we also want to set should clear to true. And what this will do is it will, before we start our drawing, it will clear the screen so that we don't see any artifacts from what was rendered before. When we start our drawing, the screen will be completely black. And let's see what other things we should do. Well, we should definitely add our layer, so let's do that. And we need to work towards loading our movie, so I guess we will need a data source. So let's create one, and data source will be our own VM. So let's call this workshop management VM. and data source and generate this type. Thank you very much. And this will be view model. View model. And again, this doesn't need to be internal. Public classes will work just fine for us. So we need our view model, and I guess we can also give the view model the workshop and the artisan workshop that we have been saving. But let's so actually I think we can give the whole artisan workshop state. So we can create a new constructor for our VM using Visual Studio. And I guess we want to stay consistent and put underscore here. And then we need to actually load our movie. So you see here in the Gauntlet layer, you load movie with the name of your movie XML. So this would be workshop management, and the data source will be the VM that we created. Other things that we should set is we should mark that this layer is listening to input. So we can go layer, input restrictions, and set input restrictions. And the arguments here are is mouse visible? So yes, mouse should be visible in our UI. And then the second part is just the input usage mask. So this will determine what type of things this layer is listening for. So mouse or just keyboard or everything, and listening to everything will be fine. We can also set this as the focused layer, although I'm not 100% sure what exactly this does, but they do this everywhere for their world's screens. So we can do this as well, and also screen manager try set focus to our layer. I don't think that can hurt that badly, so it should be fine. And then I think on deactivate, we need to reverse some of these steps, reset the input restrictions, and they remove the layer. I don't know if we need to lose the focus though. I don't see why that would matter, but let's at least do the input restrictions thing. And then let's remove layer. I guess they don't dispose the movies and the data sources here. But I guess we can also dispose the data source, although it is unclear how important this is, but it cannot hurt. And finalize and initialize, I don't think we need this. So just this can be our screen definition. So we just create our own layer, load our own movie, and we pass the management state onto our view model. The view model will be the thing that actually gives all the data to the UI. Well, one more thing that is done here in the party screen is that they listen to the keyboard input from this layer that we created. And then here, for example, if you press the hotkey for take troops, they go into the data source and execute some action. And I think we should implement some of these hotkeys ourselves as well. So let's override tick. And let's at least listen for enter key and escape. And these will be the keys that we can use to either confirm or cancel the management screen action. So let's do layer input is key pressed and escape. And if escape is pressed, we can do data source execute cancel. and we need to generate method for this. And if is key pressed, input key enter, then we can do data source execute done. So these will be our listeners: execute cancel, execute done. And in each one of these, we should at least do game state manager current and pop state to revert the game state into what it was before we entered our own menu. So current pop state. So since this will pop one state, it will go back onto the map state and it will automatically switch screens for us and do all of that. And of course, in the execute done, we will need to also commit the changes that we did to the state based on what we have on our UI. And here Visual Studio created these methods as internals, but I don't particularly fancy internals, so we can change them to public. But now we still need the XML file for our movie. So let's just hop in here, and where we had our combat UI prefab, we can create new workshop management XML. And we can copy what we had here as a starting point. And we don't need any of this stuff, since we will be replacing that with our own UI soon. And now I think we are ready to go take a look at what we have created. So if we go into our brewery menu, then we have this new button for manage workshop. And this should create new states here in the game states. But of course, instead of doing that, it will just crash when we try to create the movie. And why would that be? Is it because this cannot be completely empty? So we crashed in load movie. Well, whatever, let's just choose something here. Then I guess let's do text widget. Let's copy like basic text widget from here and write like hello message here. Maybe that's why it crashed. Workshop management.xml. Workshop management. Let's try now. And let's go back into a brewery and manage workshop. Okay, and this time it looks to be working. So the crash was indeed because our movie cannot be completely empty, or it will not like that. Oh, and I was supposed to show you the game states. So now you see that we have our own workshop management state here in the game states as the second state. And we have successfully added our own layer here, which is doing all this rendering, and the screen becomes completely black because we clear it before we start doing our thing. And if we press escape here, that will pop one state from the game states, but it also actually opened this escape menu, which I don't like. Why did that happen? Let me try to figure out why it opened, because like when you're here on the plan screen, for example, and then you press escape, it doesn't open the escape menu. So let me try to figure out why that happens. Okay, I figured it out. So these input listeners needed to be key released. Previously I had here key pressed. So the key pressed, when I first push down the key, it will exit the menu, and then later on, the thing that opens the escape menu will listen for the key release. The map is actually listening for the release event, so then it will immediately open the escape menu. So if this is just is key released, like it is right now, then it works. Okay. So now I think we can actually start working on our layout for this view. So first of all, I have the UI set debug mode 1. And then I go into the workshop and we have, and now we should have hot reloading. And I think first of all, we should have some sort of background. So if we again use our rip grep to search for background, we can find out that there is something called standard background. So let's just try to do one of those. And now if we save and go back into our game, we can see that now we have this background here. Okay. And this standard.x is actually like a library of useful widgets that are used all over the place. So we can get a head start in building our UI by picking up a few useful things from here. So let's try standard dialog close buttons. So first of all, we need some sort of widget that will contain our stuff because we cannot add multiple things onto the root. So we need container. And I keep typing stuff, so widget. And then we can try adding our standard dialog close buttons. Well, actually, let's just look how they're used. Dialog close. So here, for example, in options menu, they use this. So let's copy at least the beginning part of this so that we get some sort of idea of what we need to write. So we get cancel button and this should execute our execute cancel, which is what we have here in our VM. And then we have cancel button text, which we can for now just replace with cancel string. Then we have done button action, which will execute our execute done. And then we should have done button text, which can be just done. And that should be enough. So let's see what we got. Well, apparently we got black screen. So let me try exit and enter again. Oh, I think we need to put policy on this. So we need, on this widget that we created, we should have size policy. So let me actually quickly go over these size policies, since this is a good opportunity. So if we look for property called size policy, this is something on the widget, and the widget is the most fundamental UI element. So a widget has size policy, and it can be either fixed, stretch to parent, or cover children. And the fixed is the default. So since we did not give a width size policy, the default is to have size policy of fixed with size of 0. So you either have to set the size yourself, or you have to give it size policy, which can be either stretch to parent or cover children. And in this case, we want our background to fill the whole screen. So stretch to parent will be perfect for us. So height size policy, again, stretch to parent. And sometimes you might have to save twice for the auto reload to pick up your changes. But now, once it does, you can see that we got our background back, and we also got these buttons here on the bottom, which should look very familiar if you have seen any UI in this game. And we can also confirm that these buttons work, so we can exit the screen by pressing either done or cancel. And that is because the cancel button will execute cancel from our view model, and the done button will execute done. from the same view model. But on top of the plain background, here in standard, they actually have this window, which I think might be more applicable to what we want to do. Let me actually replace the standard background with standard window, and you can just see what it looks like. And we can already put children tag here so that we don't forget to do that later. And let's go into our workshop. So you see that we get now this UI where we have some sort of title and this more menu-like thing instead of just the plain background. If we look at how the standard window is constructed, you see that they have something called parameters here. And here they have this parameter title goes here. And you see that that is the text that we have up here. So if we come here and set the parameter title to something like brewery management, you can see that the title changed to brewery management. And here in the standard window, they have this logical children location. And this logical children location is where the game will put the child widgets that we add into this window in our children. They will go here, and maybe you can see that this will be sort of container area with some margins around it, which will limit our stuff into some area so that it doesn't overlap with the title here, and also a bit of margin on all the sides. So now if we put our stuff here as a children of the standard window, we don't have to worry about the top margin. And maybe you can see how you could use something like this to build your own more complicated UI elements as well. So let's see what else we could take from here. So let's maybe try standard slider. So let's just put one standard slider here and see what that would look like. And we don't get anything, but sometimes the hot reloading is not perfect and it doesn't actually update the UI with your changes. And whenever that happens, I usually just do some silly change, like change the white space and save again. And then when I go back into the game, it has actually updated with my change. So for example, there I saved, but it didn't actually hot reload. So I just saved again and I got my change in the game. But just like that, we got sort of nice UI slider element already. Now might be a good time to actually explain what I want to build in this UI. Now let me quickly draw a mockup of this page. So I want to have one slider that controls the daily production of the artisan beer. So let's say we have here some sort of title like production ratio. And then we have here like the artisan beer per day or something like this. And then we have production efficiency, regular beer production or something like this. And let's say, and then I want to have some sort of widget that shows that we do one artisan beer per day and our regular beer production is like 100% efficient or something like this. So I want to have a slider that controls how much artisan beer you do per day. And if you decide to do more artisan beer, that will limit your regular beer production and vice versa. So how I think this will look in terms of layouting is that we will first have one list panel going from top to the bottom that will divide this up into 3 parts. So on top we have just the label, then we have the part with the slider and the numbers, and then we have third part with these bottom labels here that describe the numbers above them. So the first thing we will need is this vertical list panel. So instead of just having a slider here, let's do a list panel. And let's look for usages of list panel. And I want something like a vertical layouting method. And one sort of weird thing about the list panel layouting is that when you're doing horizontal list panel, then the reasonable layouting method is left to right, meaning that the first thing you put into the list panel is on the left, and then the subsequent ones go onto the right, which is, I guess, the standard, at least in the Western world. We put the first thing on the left. But if you do vertical layouting, the vertical layouting, it's sort of flipped, so that if you choose the layouting method bottom to top, that will actually give you the layouting method that you usually want, the one where the first thing you put into the list panel will be on the top. So I don't know why, but for some reason it is flipped like that. So let's remove this slider for now. And we have our size policy. Cover children seems fine. I think that is everything we need for the list panel arguments. And we need children here. So the first child will be just this production ratio widget. So I think we can just do text widget here with size policy. And we can copy the size policy from here. So cover children will be fine for our text widget as well. And then we need some sort of text, which will be production ratio. And for the second row, I think I want another list panel going from left to right. So now we can copy one of those lines from here. So horizontal, well, actually, let's just write horizontal left to right. So let's take this thing. And switch the layouting method to horizontal left to right. And in here, we will put one text widget and then our standard slider. Standard slider. But we want to actually put this, we want to actually give this fixed size. So let's do suggested width. Let's start with like, let's start with fixed size of 200. And let's do another text widget here. And let's replace this with some sort of mockup. So 1 and 100%. And later on, we can connect these to actual values. But for now, let's just do the layout first. So that is our second row. And then I think for our third row, we can just write this text with text alignment left and this text with text alignment right. So let's try to put that into a widget. And let's do another 2 text widgets here. And this will be horizontal alignment left. And our second text widget should be horizontal alignment right. And this will be production, regular, beer. And let's see if any of this works at all. And this is what we got. So it's not a complete catastrophe, but there are some issues here. So first of all, I think that the slider could be bigger. So let's try 400. And for some reason, the text on the left side not really pushing the slider. Let's try putting something longer here. So it is sort of working, but I guess the slider will need to have larger margins. Let's put our 1 back here, and let's instead try to like add margins here. So let's do margin left like 40 and margin right 40, and maybe the 400 was too much, so let's try 300. So now it is looking a bit more promising already. So next I want to center the production ratio text. So let's try to find that here. And let's do horizontal alignment center. Good. And then the bottom row is not looking too hot, but that might be because this thing, the container doesn't have a size policy. So I think the width policy for this could be stretch to parent. And maybe that will let this, maybe this width size policy will let the children actually align to the right side. Well, you can see that it sort of worked, but not in the intended way. So now this whole thing is too large, and the regular beer that is right aligned goes all the way to the other side. So this stretch to parent was too powerful here. But if I do just cover children, what happens? And then they, well, that doesn't work at all. So I think I want to give the whole thing a fixed width. So here instead of, so here on the top where we start our stack of things, let's give this whole thing a fixed width so that we can use stretch to parent here without causing this issue where stuff goes all the way to the right side of the screen. So let's replace the width size policy with fixed policy and suggested width of, let's try 550 for starter. And then the stretch to parent should work a bit nicer. Okay, and now we are starting to get there. I want to put left margin on this 1 over here so that it's sort of more centered with this text. So let's put margin left here. Maybe a bit more even. And then I kind of want to try what happens if we let this slider control its own size. So let's try width size policy stretch to parent here. So now the stretch to parent works better on the slider as well, because we actually have because one of our parents has fixed size. So that's kind of nice. And I guess I want to put right margin on this last text so that that's also better aligned with this text on the bottom. So let's go margin right here. And I want to increase this margin a bit. Now I think this looks pretty good. So next, let's try to configure this slider so that it will have only 6 possible values. So I want the artisan beer production be controlled by the slider, and the minimum production amount should be 0, and the maximum should be 5 per day. So if we go look at the standard slider XML, you can see that this takes a bunch of parameters. such as min value and max value. So we should replace these with our desired values. So we type parameter min value, and this should be 0. And the max value will be 5. Now you can see that this slider only has 5 possible values, but these are not linked to anything yet. But to do that, we need to set this parameter value int. So let's do that now. So let's go parameter, and this will be something that we actually link to our view model. Parameter value int, and let's link this to the view model property called like Artisan Beer Production. And while we are at it, we could also link this one to the same property. So let's switch this to int text and get the property. But now we need to actually change our code to so that this property actually exists. So we can save this and then go change our view model. So if you remember, in our view models, we have these things. So this is one data source property. And the pattern here is that you have some sort of backing field and then property with a setter that calls on property change with value if the value is updated. And we can just copy this for our view model here. Let's put it here, for example. And this property will be called Artisan Beer Production. And let's rename the backing field. And also this thing. And then when we are actually leaving this screen, we should, if the player leaves via execute done, we should actually set the Artisan Workshop internal state to reflect the value we select with the slider. So here we can go through the workshop management state to get except that we cannot do that because they are set as private. So here the workshop and Artisan Workshop are set as private. So let's just fix that. Like so. And let's set the daily production amount to the value that we have. To the value we have here in our property. Now, if we launch this again, the slider should now be actually functional. So let's go to a brewery, manage workshop. And and over here, we don't have the label anymore, so something is not right. Let's see if we put breakpoint here. Does the slider work? Nope. Is property ever accessed? Nope. Did I typo? No. Oh, this should actually be @ sign and not brackets. So brackets is for, so this would mean that the Artisan Beer Production is like nested VM, but @ is for just properties. But the @ is for data source properties, so I just misremembered that part. I think. Does it work now? Well, now at least the getter is hit. And yes, the slider controls the amount on the left. And there's some fighting going on over here with the size of the slider changing if the text changes. And that's not very nice. So let's give this thing fixed size. So over here, instead of cover children, let's change this to a fixed size. So suggested width, let's try 20. Is that too much or too little? Well, it is still changing the size of the slider. Let's try 40. Surely that's a lot. I don't have debug mode enabled, so that's why it doesn't reload my changes. So let's go back into 40. And that is enough. So is it too much? Maybe it's a bit too much. Let's try 20 and exit and enter again. And that looks pretty good. So now you see that at least the left side number is actually controlled by this slider. And if we set this to 5 and then come back, it's not stored. Well, of course it's not stored because when I create the VM, I'm supposed to set the Artisan Beer Production based on the number that I get, based on the initial daily production amount. So let's try again. So let's set the Artisan Beer Production to 5 and then try to come back. And it remembered that we selected 5. And if we wait for a day, so after 1 day of waiting, we should have 5 items here. And you can see that we actually managed to change the production speed. So now the only last thing I want to do is control this right side number also based on this slider value. So for this, let's replace the static text here with regular beer production text. And we also need to add this to our view model. And this will be a string property. Called regular beer production. And this should be string, and this should be regular. Okay. So I want this production efficiency to be inverse of the artisan beer production, so that if you choose to produce 5 artisan beer, then you get no regular beer output. So let's write some sort of thing like update regular production label, which will be the place where we can set this text to what it should actually be based on the value we have over here on the artisan beer production. So we should also call this. So we should call our method in the beginning, and whenever we get a new value for the artisan beer production from the. So I want the production efficiency to be 120 if the artisan beer production has been set to 0. And then for each unit of artisan beer production, we want to reduce it by 20. But now I actually realized that the max value here should have been 6, because 6 times 20 is 120. So let me just quickly come here and set the max allowed value for the artisan beer production to 6. So now if you select 6 artisan beer per day, then you get no regular beer output. And then we should set the regular beer production to string format and the number that we give it and a %sign. Just like so. Now hopefully this label we put on the right side should also follow whatever we choose on the slider. Okay, and that was not enough. What is going on here? Right now the string is null, and then it is 100%. So is the problem then in here? Yes. Oh, this looks complete. No, this one. Regular beer production. Yes, typo again. So now if regular beer production text and regular beer production, yeah, okay. Let's just call this regular beer production then, since I didn't include the text in the view model property. And then now finally we actually get this text. And here we have the same issue once more, that if we change the value, the size of the text changes and the size of the slider changes. So then let's also fix the size of this thing. So let's do suggested width. It should be a bit larger, I feel. Let's try 50. Oh, and we don't have hot reloading, so let's go out and come back in. And that's not enough. You see that it breaks it onto 2 lines. So let's try 100. And that's at least enough, but now this margin is too large for me. So let's try reducing this margin right to like 15. And we can also reduce the margin on the right side here to like 20. And now it's looking pretty good. And one more thing I should test is that if we set the production to 6 over here, and then leave and go to the other brewery that we own over here, the production is still at 1. And we can sanity check and go back into the first brewery and see that the production is still set to 6. So now we have completed our management UI. But one thing we did not do is that we do not change the regular beer production based on whatever percentage we show here. So in the next episode, I will show how we can change the code of the game so that the normal workshops respect whatever production efficiency we claim they should have over here. But since our UI is now done, I want to thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.